Great. Thanks so much, Matt. And thanks everyone for hanging out this afternoon and reading the report and sticking around for the presentation. As Matt mentioned, my name is Cory and I am an analyst with NAPCO Research. NAPCO Research, as Matt mentioned as well, is part of NAPCO Media, which has also joined forces with Printing United Alliance. So Elizabeth and I are our colleagues over at Printing United. As Matt mentioned as well, we've been working with BMI for a few years now on this report. I've done the last three. A little bit of background on myself. I've been with NAPCO for 10 years, but I actually just joined the research division about 3 years ago. Prior to that, I was the editor of one of our publications, Packaging Impressions. So I was the editor of that magazine, which covers the label and packaging industry specifically. So I've been around the print world for 10 years now, but fairly new to researching the other segments, including the book industry, and really excited to be here and to share some of the things that we found. And a lot of this too requires interviews with some members here, and I think over the past few years I've interviewed several of the people in this room. So thank you for all of your insights to help me kind of really get a grasp of this industry and really start to understand it as I have made the transition away from just focusing on the label and packaging world into the entirety of print, including the book industry. So thank you all for your generosity and time with all of that. So just briefly to touch on NAPCO Research and what we do, as I mentioned, we're a division of NAPCO Media, part of Printing United Alliance, and we're the parent company of several publications that you'll see out in the world of print: Printing Impressions, In-Plant Impressions, Packaging Impressions, which is my former magazine, the Wide Format Impressions publication, which covers graphics and signs. And what we do as an internal research team is all sorts of research and analysis into all of the industries and segments that our publications cover. And as part of that, we do everything you see here, from strategic content, market intelligence, market sizing and forecasting, consultation, and even some training, speaking engagements, and some training programs as well. So we do a lot of different things. You'll see our work across all segments of the industry, and we're actually starting to grow a little bit. I'll introduce you to the team because I want to give some credit to everyone on the team as well. I'm just one member of a 6-person entity. And I really wanted to just give credit to everyone as part of the NAPCO research team because it really takes everyone that you see here to do the work that we do. We're led by Nathan Safran, our VP, who is a former Forrester research analyst and has extensive experience in just the world of research in general. You might recognize Lisa Cross and Andy Paparosi. They've both been in the industry for decades and are just such wealth of knowledge. Experts in the whole world of print. Lisa's our principal analyst, and like me, actually came to the research side from the journalism industry. She was an industry journalist in the print world before coming over to research. And Andy is our chief economist, who, when we talk about what's going on in economics as it pertains to print, Andy is such a wealth of knowledge. And then our other team members as well. Evan West is our data analyst, does all sorts of deep dives into all the data we collect, creates the charts that we put out. So Evan works a lot behind the scenes, but is just incredibly skilled in all of the things that we do. And our newest hire is Onamika Dar, who works closely with Andy on the economics side. And Onamika comes to us from Marquette up in Milwaukee. And she's got a ton of experience in forecasting, reporting, economic analysis. So that's the team. You'll see us out and about at all sorts of industry events. If you come to Las Vegas in September, you'll see all of us at the Printing United Expo, which we put on, big event in September. So just wanted to give a quick recognition to everyone on the team because I've written the BMI State of the Industry report the past few years, but it really takes everyone to do the work that we do. So I want to just introduce you guys to all 6 of us. So to talk about the state of the book industry, where we are in 2024, as we've heard all throughout the sessions today, There's a lot going on, and there have been a lot of ups and downs. It's been really turbulent out there, and that's kind of the sense that I've gotten in the interviews that I've done going back to when I first took over writing this report in 2022. And even in the 3 years that I've done this report, things have changed drastically. It was really turbulent when I started writing this report in partnership with BMI. There were, the paper situation was the biggest topic going. It was really difficult to source. Inventories were getting built up as book manufacturers were bringing all this material in. Publishers had warehouses that were packed. So the paper and inventory situation was really, really getting very, very turbulent, very difficult to manage. And that's really starting to settle down. We'll get into some data on that in a little bit. But, that's really when I went to put together this year's report. That's really starting to settle, which has been really nice to see. Demand for books, it's still really strong. We're trending above pre-pandemic levels. We'll see some data here that shows that total sales were down a bit from last year. But, when you look at where book demand is compared to 2019, we're still trending well above where we were pre-pandemic. And there's some interesting insights into why that may be as part of this as well. And of course, there are threats out there. We, have heard about some of the threats that are impacting the industry. Some include potential offshoring of production, sustainability concerns, which we've just heard a lot about. So there are some threats out there that need to be managed, but there's a ton of opportunities. There's new technologies on the horizon. Digital printing, inkjet printing is a huge opportunity that's really starting to make a significant mark across all of print, including in the book industry. As a complementary technology to support the conventional offset work that's being done. And we have a strong sustainability story. There certainly are some things that the industry should be doing and should be looking into. But, domestically, particularly, here in the US, there is a strong case to be made for keeping your production onshore in North America. So there is a lot going on in the book industry. And, again, the state of the industry report, I like to think of it as just a snapshot. What we have in the report is just some of what we're hearing, some of what we're seeing, some of the data we're collecting. It's not necessarily, everything set in stone. This has really evolved in the last few years, but just kind of gives a little bit of snapshot in time into what we're seeing. So, to start out, wanted to just kind of go a little bit deeper into some of the key things that we're seeing in terms of the trends. So, since the pandemic, the book industry, there's been a lot of unpredictability. This was an industry that, this was talked about this morning, was predicated a lot on forecasting and following traditional buying cycles and having some expectations of what's coming down the line where you could really rely on what's going to happen in terms of the chronology of the year. And that's really changed. There have been the paper shortages, so strategies around that really were altered over the last few years. That is settling, and we'll get into some of the additional data on that. But just as a quick preview there, we did a research initiative late last year called the Printing United Alliance State of the Industry Report, which is a bigger state of the industry project that encompasses the entire print world. And I'll dive into that in a bit. But only 7.5%, just above, of our industry participants in that viewed material shortages as a major concern. So I think that's been a real drastic change over the last few years, and it was really interesting to see, especially given how much of an issue that was, maybe dating back to 2021, 2022. The inventory situation that's really started to settle a bit. One of the really great insights that I got for this year's report was that the big objective in 2023 was to work down that inventory for book manufacturers to work down the paper that had been built up that they bought during the shortages to, kind of give themselves a safety net, work that down, as well as on the publisher side, free up the space in their warehouses that was getting built up through the inventorying of the books that were building up in their facilities. And the industry has been largely successful in doing that, which was really, really great to hear in doing the interviews and doing the research for this year's report. So a lot of good stuff happening there. And then on the buying cycle side, again, this is something that the industry should be looking at moving forward. Things are changing in terms of the patterns of the past and when to expect increases in demand. For example, leading into the holiday season, you could expect an influx of demand based around academic calendars. There were always influxes that you could anticipate. But things are changing there in terms of how consumers are buying books, in terms of how academic institutions are buying books. And that's something that needs to be kind of considered as we look into the future in the immediate coming years, and how the industry is going to look at or how your customers are going to be looking at acquiring printed materials. So a lot of good things in terms of stabilization and kind of settling from some of the turbulence that's happened over the last few years since the pandemic. So as part of the report, I do an introductory section just called Industry Snapshots, where I look at some of the economic impacts that are happening, and some of the workforce trends, and just kind of what's going on, kind of level setting. So I just wanted to walk through some of the things that we included in this year's report. So just in terms of sales and demand is strong. This data comes from Circana BookScan, which has been a really good resource in terms of getting a sense of what's going on in terms of total printed book sales. So, demand is strong. In 2023, 767 million printed book units were sold as reported by BookScan. This was below 2022 levels, but again, it was significantly up from 2019. So we're still trending above our pre-pandemic levels. So, kind of what we're seeing is that really reinvigorated appreciation and love of reading that we saw in 2020 and 2021 when people were stuck at home with the quarantines, the lockdowns. That's continued, which is really exciting. It wasn't just that these, lockdowns that we remember from those years got rolled back and all of a sudden people just put their books down and went back to their normal lives. They have really stuck with this increased level of reading that we saw during the pandemic years. Some of the strongest segments, adult fiction, saw growth over 2022 into 2023, nearly 1%. The other segments, I'll get into some of that data later on, but other segments were slightly down, but again, still in terms of just an overall trend, looking really good compared to where we were pre-pandemic. There was a bit of a decline on the children's book side, about 13.5 million units below 2022, and where that kind of really bubbled up was in the middle grade books from children's 8 to 11. There was a decline of about 10%. And we heard a bit about this in the presentation this morning from Alicia, that during the pandemic, children were affected. Schools were closed, libraries were closed, bookstores were closed. And those age groups are so crucial for developing a love of learning. Ages 8 to 11, that's really when you're starting to to get into those longer books, chapter books, and really starting to independently read for pleasure. And that was really a problem for children of those ages. So hopefully that will start to recover, and through the work that they're doing, we'll start to see that kind of increase, and hopefully those kids weren't, impacted too much in the long run during those years when schools, libraries, bookstores all had to close down. So, all things considered, yes, there was a bit of a dip from 2022 into 2023, but, I think the industry can feel good about where it is, especially considering that still, years post-pandemic, the industry is performing very well compared to where we were in 2019. So all good things there. In terms of other economic impacts that are bubbling up in the industry, when I wrote this report in 2023, looking into some of the survey work done by Wall Street Journal, there was a lot of concern that year that was really alarming. They do an annual economic survey where they survey, I want to say it's between 60 to 70 economic experts across several industries. And coming into 2023, there was largely expected to be a recession. Now, what they did forecast was that recession would be both brief and mild, but a recession nonetheless. The good news is that never materialized. There certainly were economic, ups and downs throughout the year, but in terms of an actual, recession based on the definition of the term, never materialized in 2023. Coming into 2024, looking at this year's economic forecast from the journal, similar, there's not an expectation that there will be a recession this year, but some of the phrasing that was reported by the journal through this economic survey that they do annually was that there may be times that feel like a recession. So, going by the traditional definition of the word, not anticipated this year, but, there is a lot of unknowns out there. We mentioned, in the last session that, of course, it is an election year. So, there are things on the horizon that could have an impact from an economic standpoint as we go throughout 2024. In terms of workforce, there's been some really interesting things happening in terms of just general workforce levels in the print industry overall. This data comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and employment actually increased in Q4 of 2023, about 369,000 employees in the entirety of the print industry. So it's good to see that ticking up, and you can see the big dip, which was February going into March of 2020, where there was that major drop off in overall industry employment as a result of the pandemic. So we are still well below that level, but it's been good to see, and there have been some ups and downs here on this chart. But coming into the last quarter of 23, that was ticking upwards a bit, and we're seeing a little bit of increase in employment in the overall print industry there. And I'll get into some data on the next slide, but there are challenges that print providers are citing, and it's not just production. We talked a lot in the last session about the perception of the industry as it's an older industry, it's a manufacturing, heavy machinery type of industry, and there are some challenges on hiring production staff, but even sales staff too. A lot of members that we survey have reported that sales staff is a moderate to critical challenge as well. So some specifics on that. This comes from a research initiative that we do at NAPCO Research on the commercial print industry. So this isn't necessarily data from the book world specifically, but from overall commercial print. But I think it's applicable across anyone that's doing any sort of printing out there. Hiring and workforce development, it remains a critical issue in all of print. And even, back when I was on Packaging Impressions doing that magazine, there were, didn't matter whether it was labels, folding cartons, flexible packaging, corrugated, everyone is having trouble with workforce development and hiring. So this is some recent data on that from North American commercial printers. And on the production side, again, that is a big challenge. 65% of respondents here stated that this was a moderate to critical challenge, hiring production staff. 31% slight challenge, and just 4% stated that they were having no challenge at all in hiring production staff. So kind of concerning to see that. And on the sales staff side, similar numbers, 61% critical, moderate challenge. And, again, we see less than 10% saying no challenge at all. And training is also proven to be a challenge, less so than hiring. But, it's just really a little alarming to see just how much the industry is struggling in bringing people into this industry and training them up for a long sustained career in the world of print. This is a big challenge for the industry. It's something that there's not an easy answer for, but I think just as a collective, and we're doing a lot of work at Printing United on this, is really helping to change that perception. And this is something that everyone in the industry needs to kind of take some initiative, take some responsibility, and get out there and show that, there are some really exciting, fun technologies to work with, whether it's, digital printers that can do personalization, whether it's graphic design. There's so much more to print than I think people understand. So, on a industry association level, that's something that we're really working on. And, anytime I see printers going out into the community and introducing opportunities at their facility and really introducing, whether it's at the high school level, trade school level, even college, university level, what a career in print really looks like, it really opens people's eyes to what's out there. And it's something that we all know. It's something that, I think is internally established throughout all of print, but it's getting that word out there about just how exciting a career in print is and how much technology is changing. The AI sessions this morning, that there's going to be so much fun opportunity to utilize that. And yes, there are concerns that it could impact people's jobs, but the ability to leverage some of that technology that's getting embedded into some of the equipment out there, I think would be really exciting for someone coming out of school to see how it's going to have an impact in this industry. So this remains a challenge, the workforce component of it. So I really think just from an advocacy standpoint, it's up to the entire industry to continue to get the word out there about just how exciting of an industry the world of print is. And the book industry, who doesn't love a good book and get excited when they walk into a bookstore and see all of the covers and titles? It's just such a fun industry, and I think we just need to help get the word out there. In terms of sales, this is some data that comes from the State of the Industry project that is actually spearheaded by Andy Paparosi, who I mentioned earlier. This is something that we're doing on a quarterly basis with updates and an annual basis overall, which has been sponsored by Canon USA over the years. And Andy's really taking the lead on this initiative. But I wanted to show this data because there are concerns out there from an economic standpoint. We have avoided the concerns of a recession, but there are challenges. There's inflation, there's interest rates, there's weak manufacturing job growth across all of the manufacturing segments. There's supply chain challenges, which have been brought up before, as well as unknowns about the election year. But there is optimism from all print segments, and I should mention, State of the Industry is everyone. There's commercial printers involved in this, wide format, book, packaging. This is representative of all print segments, and there's optimism. There's optimism for sales growth. More than half of respondents here responded to the question of, do you expect to see a sales increase in 2024 versus 23? More than half said yes, we expect our sales to be higher. Just over a third said about the same, which, that is a little bit of a concern. This is an industry that, of course, is, predicated on growth. So seeing a third say that they're going to be consistent is not ideal, but, also there is something to be said for consistency, which, is a good thing. And, 13% of respondents stated that they were expecting a decrease in sales. So the average, though, expected change, it was expected to be moderate, on average about a 4.3% increase in sales, but with the top fifth, the top 20% stating that they expected their sales gains to be just above 13%. So, not massive sales gains, but at least there is optimism from the industry overall from a sales perspective that things should increase this year compared to 2023. So definitely reason for some optimism in terms of sales. This also comes from the same State of the Industry project, and I thought this was a really interesting set of data. It might be a little hard to see, so I'm going to pull out some key numbers here. But before I do that, the question that was posed as part of this table was just how much of a concern do you expect the below factors to be during the first half of this year? And this was presented to the industry in Q3 of 23. And it just lists out, a whole big variety of factors that were going to be impacting the print industry. So the top factors were, maintaining profitability, increasing sales. Those were the top two. And, we just saw on the prior slide that there is some general optimism about increasing sales, but, it was kind of a moderate optimism. So, what this tells me is that, 2/3, 66.5.3% of respondents rate maintaining profitability and increasing sales as a major concern. So while there is optimism that sales will tick up in 24 compared to 23, maybe it's not enough to maintain profitability or enough to cover some rising costs, which we see as just below that. Labor costs, energy costs also ranked as major concerns. So, again, while there is optimism on the sales front, I think there's a concern about the level of increase across the industry to maintain profitability, maintain margins going forward, and cover some of the rising costs that we're seeing in cost of labor and cost of energy. What was also really interesting, though, in addition to some of these top concerns, were some of the minor concerns or not a concern. At the very, very bottom, as I mentioned before, just 7.6% of respondents referred to material shortages or inability to acquire the materials needed as a major concern. And, thinking about doing this report 2-3 years ago, that's a drastic change. So that was really interesting to see just how much of a shift has occurred in terms of the ability to acquire material and, some moving forward from the material shortages that really marked those initial pandemic years. So that was encouraging to see that and see how much of a transition there's been in terms of material availability and the right setting of the shortages that had occurred. And other kind of minor concerns that were reported, and these were kind of a little bit more evenly split, were from a cost perspective, rising substrate costs. That was about a third of each, stating that it was a major, moderate, or minor concern. So that could have some variation depending on what segment you're in. But then on the consumable side, rising ink and toner costs, a quarter said it was a major concern, but about half said, not much of a concern there. So really interesting to see where some of the cost concerns are, labor and energy at the top, but materials, substrate, and ink and toner consumables as not as big of concerns as some of those other ones. So really interesting to see here what is going on in terms of concerns that printers across the board have coming into 2024. Wanted to talk a little bit about offshoring. This was something that came up a lot this year in terms of a big concern that's on the table for 2024. This is not necessarily a new threat that's out there. This is something that has been impacting the book industry for quite some time, but it's something that the industry really does need to be mindful of. And the key thing here is to understand what the advantages are from a domestic perspective, and why it is beneficial to keep production here in North America, and some of the advantages that it provides to publishers. So a lot of that comes down to proximity, to logistics, and what we can offer here that is a little bit more easily digestible compared to what you get overseas, especially as we've seen logistics and supply chain get upended in the last few years. So domestically, we have production occurring closer to distribution. If you're distributing in the U.S., being able to produce closer to where it's going to end up, that eliminates any major shipping concerns coming from around the world. Especially if we're talking about shipments coming off of boats that could get hung up. We've seen in various situations where there were blockages in the various canals, or challenges getting unloaded at docks. So being able to produce closer to distribution, huge benefit. Reducing those lengthy shipping times and potential delays, very similar. Affordable low volume production and on-demand printing, some of the advantages that are coming to fruition through digital printing, through production inkjet printing. There's really this great opportunity domestically as these technologies continue to come online to get those low volumes out there into the market, and then maybe supplement them with longer run offset production that you can kind of at least appease the market with an initial low volume introduction of a title, and then wait for those larger shipments to come in. So opportunities there from a technological standpoint. The production flexibility that the same technology provides can improve the potential inventory concerns. If you're doing huge runs that are coming in from overseas, those need to get inventoried, those need to get warehoused. And we saw what happened in the last few years as a result of some of the challenges there. So being able to produce flexibly using some of the new technologies that are out there can really help to mitigate that. And then there's opportunities for smaller printers to capture work that may have been previously unattainable. If you're a smaller producer that maybe invested in a digital press, digital workflow, you can capture some of that work to bring some of that production onshore, while some of the larger printers then specialize in the longer runs. So thinking about how to kind of best utilize those technologies, both digital and conventional, in a complementary way, can really open up some opportunities for some of the smaller printers out there to help satisfy that work, collaborate with some of the larger printers out there to take on some of the shorter runs, while the larger producers can leverage some of the key benefits that they offer on some of the lower cost large volume runs. So that's a big one. It's one that I think is going to develop over time. There's still a lot of unknown out there into how this will all shake out, but there's a lot of benefits to what's being done domestically, and especially as new technologies open the door to some of these new opportunities. So coming off of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on, in inkjet, in digital printing, and some of the plans for equipment investment that we're seeing out there in the industry. So just in terms of, the inkjet advantage in general, it's providing that flexibility, and digital print overall does this, but we're seeing a lot of attention, especially as the technology comes online, and we'll see, I'm sure, a ton of it at Drupa in a few weeks. and at Printing United in September. But production inkjet is really providing that flexibility for printers and publishers that maybe wasn't there in the past. And we're seeing this across all of print. Certainly in the packaging world, that flexibility to do those short runs to get to satisfy immediate need while maybe you ramp up to a longer run. Just introducing that flexibility has been huge. Being able to produce books quickly and on demand is really beneficial in times when demand is unpredictable. In a few interviews I did this year with members for the State of the Industry report, book talk came up. It came up multiple times that this is a new phenomenon, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the subset of TikTok called book talk, where these influencers, they'll get on and they'll recommend a title, and all of a sudden demand will skyrocket just overnight, basically. And that will need to be satisfied. And that's really difficult to do with, high volume, long run production that takes a lot of time to, maybe get shipped in and distributed. But being able to, go to press quickly and satisfy an immediate demand for a title that might just, out of the blue gain a ton of attention is really a great opportunity for digital print technology. There's, test marketing opportunities, being able to print books in a small quantity, see how it sells, see if there's demand for it, see if it ramps up, and then you can do the high production run, the high volume run. This was a big trend in the packaging world where maybe a brand wants to get on shelf and just see how things go. They'll do that digitally, and then they'll, ramp up to a big flexo run or an offset run. Same thing in books, getting a title out on the shelf, seeing how it sells, printing that digitally before ramping up to an offset run is a great opportunity and way to sort of mitigate some risk before you commit to high volume. Ordering strategies, that's the digital print advantage. The inkjet advantage has really been able to change how the industry is ordering books, ordering printed materials. You can order in lower volumes more frequently. The forecasting that was mentioned this morning is always a little bit of an unknown. It's a bit of a guessing game. And being able to, maybe order more often, but in lower quantities, that's a huge opportunity to kind of maybe more accurately get the right number of titles, right number of printed materials that you need in order to satisfy a customer. And then, the other thing that has really been great to see is just how much advancement there's been in color, in quality on the digital print side and on the inkjet side. And I'm sure we'll see a ton of advancements play out at Drupa later this month, at Printing United in September. But the quality that's coming off all kinds of digital presses, including inkjet, really has risen to the level of conventional printing, of offset. So, when this technology first came out, there definitely was concern over that. That's really becoming less of an issue to the point where, most of the time it's often indistinguishable as to what technology was used to produce a book. So a lot of advantages there. This shows that there's some interest in the technology. This data comes from a report that was actually sponsored by BMI that we did a few years ago called The Role of Inkjet Printing and Automation Empowering Industry 4.0 in Book Publishing. So at the time, and it's not the largest sample size, but I think this provides a pretty good snapshot of just how the industry was thinking at the time a few years ago. Nearly half of respondents were currently printing books using production inkjet equipment. 52% said that they aren't and had no plans to purchase production inkjet for printing books. I'd like to maybe revisit this study a few years later, see how that's changed, if that's changed, especially as we've seen a lot of advancement in the technology. But what was really interesting, even going back 3 years, was that half of the respondents here stated that that they were currently using production inkjet to produce books. So definitely a positive to see that there is this adoption happening in the book industry of digital print technologies, of inkjet, to really complement what's being done on the offset side. And again, just to reiterate, we see a ton of opportunity in digital. We see a lot of technology advancements in digital, but and this goes for across the world of print. We tend to think of it not as a replacement technology. It was the same thing in packaging, same thing in commercial. Conventional printing is not going to disappear. There's absolutely a strong place for it in the industry. The high volumes of production across all of print, including books, of course, is going to remain. But being able to leverage both of these technologies and the benefits that they provide, using their advantages where needed in the best possible ways to satisfy short run, on demand, personalization with digital, and then that lower cost, high volume where needed. There's just a lot of great advantages of both that, when utilized in tandem, can really benefit the industry from like a best of both worlds perspective. So that was cool to see that half of our respondents here, they're already using inkjet. And I think if we revisited this study a few years later now in 24, that maybe this would look a little bit different. And I think maybe later on this year, after some of the big shows, that maybe this will look a little different as well. But really, it's great to see that there is that open mind out there. From the same study, we also asked respondents, what are the key decision factors when you're deciding to print a book offset versus digital? And right at the top, not a huge surprise here, run length was far and away the top decision driver. 95% said that was very important. But what was interesting to me to see right below it were these two responses, cost per unit and total costs. So unit cost actually ranked a bit higher than total cost. About 3/4 of respondents stated that that was very important. Total cost also factored pretty high. Almost 65% of respondents here stated that that was a key component of it. But, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but also in, multiple interviews that I did for this year's report, the total cost of ownership, that TCO mindset, that came up over and over again, where from, doing this report over the last few years, it's become clear that, historically, the book industry has been one that's been really predicated on unit cost and prioritizing, getting just the lowest unit cost, regardless of whatever the production run may be. But I really think that we're going to start to see mindsets shift as we move forward into total cost, especially as we learned over the last few years that there's warehousing, there's manufacturing, there's shipment. There's a lot of costs that also factor into just the life cycle of a book beyond just production. So this was really interesting to me to see that, a few years ago, unit cost ranked a bit higher than total cost when thinking about printing technology to use. And I think, maybe as we move forward, that might shift a little bit as well as we start to think about the total costs. And, maybe there is an instance where doing a low volume run close to distribution where you don't need to inventory as much, it's going to result in a higher unit cost, but maybe over time, that cost is going to end up being lower. So that was really interesting to see. And I think that we'll start to see mindsets change a bit as we move forward. So just diving a little bit further into equipment and investment and what we might see going forward. This goes back to the overall Printing United State of the Industry report, the Canon-sponsored report that Andy works on. This was really interesting to see too that there is a lot of interest this year in 2024 in investment in capital equipment. 9% more participants this year stated that they expect to make a capital investment in 24 versus 23. Now, again, the rate of investment was pretty moderate, 3.4 to 3.7% of sales was the average in terms of how much investment printers expected to put into capital equipment. But, overall, seeing a lot of interest in acquiring new advanced equipment as this new technology comes online. And, almost 10% more compared to last year. And, maybe that's a result of it being a Drupa year and printers expect to see a lot of new exciting technology at the show in a few weeks. Or maybe it's a matter of, we saw some optimism around sales on an earlier slide. So whatever the reason may be, there is interest this year in and expectation this year in capital expenditures of new equipment. Hardware and software, I should mention as well, coming into this year. So that was encouraging to see as well that printers are looking to invest in new technology and thinking about workforce too. That's another huge component for people that you might be trying to attract into the industry, bringing in some of the latest equipment out there that is digitally driven and provides all these great creative opportunities can be really beneficial from a workforce perspective as well, getting people excited about what's really going on in print. And before we close this section, move on to some of the other things that were included in this year's report, I wanted to just mention as well this shift in mindset to total cost of ownership, because again, this was something that came up a lot in interviews this year and something that really seems to be important on the minds of the industry. As I mentioned before, unit cost has really been the traditional primary metric used when assessing book production and purchasing, but this change is happening. Especially over the last few years, where there was those inventory costs, those warehousing costs, and even the when a product expires and it has to get pulped or destroyed, the costs involved there. Again, there's a lot more that goes into the life cycle of a book or any printed piece beyond just the printing. And this I borrowed from KNK. Sourcing them there because this was a great article at the bottom of that graphic that kind of outlined this. K&K is a software and consulting firm in the publishing world, and they kind of laid it out in this great series of articles. But just generally speaking, there's printing and manufacturing, there's distribution, and there's infrastructure, and that all goes into this TCO mindset. And I think that's just going to be really important going forward. We saw how important that was over the past few years. And, things are, a little unpredictable. And we learned that during the pandemic. And, I think as these new technologies come online, this is going to become more of a factor and just more of a prevalent element that will be in printers' mindsets and publishers' mindsets as we move forward. So understanding all of the factors that go into TCO, whether it's distribution, infrastructure, of course, the manufacturing, obsolescence, all of these key components are all going to have a major impact on the overall cost of a book throughout its life cycle. So it'll be really interesting to see just the impact that this has as mindsets in the industry kind of shift more towards total cost versus unit cost. So sustainability, this, we heard a lot about in the last panel, and of course is going to be a major factor in all of print. And I mean, I come from the packaging side, and this is the topic, and is definitely one that is top of mind in the book segment as well. So I wanted to just start by introducing some elements to be aware of. So we talked about it in the last session, but some of the legislation that's on the table and going into effect in Europe, the deforestation that was mentioned, as well as the carbon tax that's happening, and being able to report down to the plot of land or the exact carbon footprint that's occurring, being able to report that for items that are going into the EU. That's going to be hugely important. EPR, that was mentioned in the last session as well. And as we learned, it's a huge component in the book segment. It is a little bit more of a pressing issue in some of the other print segments, especially, we mentioned packaging, and that's, where my background is. And this is a huge component there, and maybe less so in book, but as we learned, this is absolutely still worth monitoring, and there's a lot of nuance to these EPR legislation initiatives that are coming online to really keep an eye on. And of course, the industry perception, the PR battle that's out there is challenging in print. There's a lot of negative perception of all of print, whether it's on paper because we're cutting down trees, or printing on plastics, or whatever it is. There is that PR challenge out there, but there are resources through BMI, through Printing United, through some of the other associations out there to help get the word out there. And I wanted to just walk through this data quickly as well. So this goes back to our research that we did on the NAPCO side in 2023. This is from a survey of actually communication buyers and influencers. So, so the customers out there. And how important is sustainability to them? And the answer was very. We see on the top line, printed materials produced by sustainable methods will be important going into the future. Almost everyone agreed with that. Less than 10% disagreed. Similar data on sustainability being a key factor in our print buying decisions. That came out to 80%, saying that they agreed with that. So this is really important to the customers out there, whether it's publishers, whether it's brands, retailers, whoever it is. Sustainability is top of mind, and it's something that printers really need to keep an eye on, whether it's legislative, perception-based, or just satisfying customer needs. So what can we do? I guess we'll start with the chart on this one, because this shows that there is action being taken. This is from the same survey, but flipping it to the printers. The question posed to the printers here was, how much do you agree with the following? Our company is taking action to improve our environmental sustainability. And almost 70% agreed, which is great. It's a majority. That's good to see. But there's work to be done. Almost, over 30% say that they disagree, that their organization is really not taking sustainability actions. So I really think we need to see that number tick up a bit higher on that agree side. But there's a lot to do. So what's out there? Monitoring that EU legislation and being ready to report as much as possible. Of course, there are the challenges that we learned, but being ready for that when that comes online. Leverage your associations, BMI, Printing United Alliance. We offer, all sorts of resources out there to help improve sustainability, help, assess where there may be improvements that you can take. And we have a lot of documentation on that. Other, certifications, whether it's SGP, FEC, Green Book Alliance, there's a lot of opportunity there to help with the tracking component. I was just working on an article where I looked into some of the benefits of SGP, for example, and some of the advantages that their tracking capabilities provides, those that get certified, is really beneficial to be able to see just how much of an impact organizations are having. And, leveraging your sustainability as a tool, going back to the offshoring issue, as a way to maintain that domestic work. We do have requirements here. We do have a sustainability story here domestically and regulations that, maybe in other geographies aren't as prevalent. So being able to really tout what you're doing here as, whether it's legislation in at the state level or whatever it may be, there are advantages here versus some of the other geographies where there might not be as much regulation around the sustainability of production. So we are doing well. Companies are taking action, but we need to see that tick up a bit higher and start moving in a more action-oriented direction in terms of sustainability efforts. So quickly going into some of the markets here. As we mentioned before, book demand dropped compared to the pandemic years, but it's still above 2019. Trade segments were down a bit, but again, overall, there was an increase compared to where we were pre-pandemic from 694 million up to 767. So, as we mentioned before, just overall in the market, just wanted to reiterate that we are doing well. Things are looking strong compared to where we were previously. So, what's driving that? It's that rediscovering of reading that happened at the height of the pandemic. It really hasn't faded. And there's a great quote here that I wanted to show from the chief executive of the Publishers Association. It's clear that many people rediscovered their love of reading last year. Publishers were able to deliver the entertaining, thought-provoking books that many of us needed. That hasn't gone away. That's been really encouraging to see those numbers staying above those pre-pandemic levels because people really rediscovered reading when they were stuck at home, and that hasn't disappeared yet. So really, really encouraging there. E-commerce has made buying books, finding books easier. We talked about Amazon a lot. There are those large online retailers, of course, but there's independent bookstores too, using indie commerce. And I found this statistic in doing some research. Independent bookstores using indie commerce to get their inventories online have achieved over $200 million in online revenue since 2020. So it's not just the big players on the e-commerce side. There are opportunities for some of the smaller entities out there. And, the social media impact. Reading is not something that we're doing by ourselves at home. There's communities out there. And of course there have been book clubs forever, but you can connect with hundreds, thousands of other kind of like-minded readers, whether it's Book Talk, Goodreads. The online discourse and community that's been developed around reading has really helped drive and maintain and sustain the love of reading that really returned during the pandemic. From Publishers Weekly, I wanted to just highlight this chart. This is in the report as well. You can kind of see where some of the segments ticked down across, pretty much everywhere. There was a little bit of a decrease. Adult fiction ticked up, almost 1%. There were some of the largest drops in juvenile and young adult segments, which marks a little bit of a shift. So I wanted to just kind of run through that quickly as well. On the adult side, that Book Talk, that's really, really driving interest in sales. The Colleen Hoover example was one that came up in interviews, and I looked into it, and at the end of last year, there were 3 titles of hers in the top 10. And the online Book Talk driven conversation around her books has really helped drive interest in those titles and really helped drive just online fiction or adult fiction overall. On the young adult and juvenile fiction side of things, we saw that those middle grade readers, those 8 to 11-year-olds, they were negatively impacted by the pandemic. Those formative years really were unfortunate for what happened there. And on the YA side, though, I did some digging into that and I was thinking, we see YA titles all the time. What's going on there? And some of the writing that I saw in a lot of literature-based blogs was really interesting in that YA has shifted, and some of the main characters are not as relatable as they used to be. They're really trending more towards adult and having adult readers read some of these YA titles that are being published as YA. But those 13 to 15-year-olds, they're not seeing themselves in that genre as much as they used to, because it's really being driven more for an adult audience. And sure, those teenagers can handle some of those themes, but they're not seeing themselves in those books as much as they used to, because they're more highlighting some of those older young adult audiences, the 18-year-olds. So that was really interesting to see that representation in that genre has really shifted a bit, and I think maybe could have had an impact here. In terms of the academic side, this is kind of the last bit of data that I wanted to highlight. The expected digitization of educational content has not eliminated printed material from the classroom. And in Alicia's presentation this morning, that was really, really great to see that young students still love the printed books. They get excited when it comes up. On the academic side, there was an expectation that everything's going digital. All educational content is going to go digital. The textbook that we know it is going to disappear. But what's happened is that there's been this combination. There's been the digital educational material, which has been really beneficial, but supplementing it with print has really helped to drive that content home, drive that understanding of the content home, because it helps to support the retention of the information. And maybe the traditional hardcover textbook could get phased out, but that provides new opportunities for digital book printing. Maybe it goes to softcover books that students can write in and maybe tear pages out of, and then they just get reprinted for the next year. And a couple quotes that I found that kind of helped support that I wanted to just share was, this comes from an academic study that I found on this exactly, print versus screen. And the device, what the authors put forward was that the device seems to attract young children's attention at the expense of the attention being paid to the storyline. They focus on the technology, they focus on the device, and not the actual story in their hands. So really a positive sentiment for the printed book. And then similarly, when the reading assignment demands more engagement or deeper comprehension, students may be better off reading in print. This was from an article in Business Insider. And I thought that was a great point too. Online digital material is great for presenting, concepts, big ideas, topics, but when you need to get really fully engaged and immersed, students retain better in print. So that was really encouraging to see that on the academic side, things are doing well. And then just the last couple things here, as I mentioned, digital content, it's still valuable in academic settings. I don't want to write it off entirely. It has speed, it has interactivity, personalization, and variability that print doesn't necessarily offer. We mentioned the big ideas concept, which presents topics, it presents concepts, but supplemented with print, which we're seeing now on the ed tech side, that combination is really beneficial. And we mentioned those old models of textbooks could get phased out, but it just presents new opportunities for maybe softcover, low volume books that can get printed digitally and replaced year after year. So just to conclude, the stabilization that we're seeing has been really positive to see. The last few years, I really applaud everyone in this room for weathering the storm. Things are returning to normal. Supply chain, inventory is all doing really well. Embrace the new technologies out there. This is going to be a big year. It's a Drupa year. We have Printing United. There's a lot of new technology that's coming out. AI, a huge one. Implement automation. Look into AI where you can. That can help mitigate the workforce issues out there. Same with digital. There's cost-effective, low-volume opportunities. So look at opportunities there. See what's out there. Monitor the sustainability legislation. We heard all about that earlier. Keep an eye on that. It will have an impact in the industry, and maintain that flexibility. As we know, stagnancy can be a real enemy of progress. And as we learned over the last few years, things are unpredictable and you need to change on a dime. So maintaining that flexibility is going to be really beneficial, and use the resources that are available to adapt to those evolving circumstances. So we covered a lot. Thanks everyone for your time. I appreciate all of your input into the report. The many of you that have done interviews with me, thank you for accommodating me on that. And thank you all for your attention today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Cory. We have time for maybe 1-2 questions.
Sorry,
if there are any.
Ran over.
That's all right. I think you covered a lot of ground, so there probably aren't any questions. All right, great. Thank you, Cory.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you.